Number 26 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to continue its work on the operational security of the parliamentary precinct along Wellington and Spark Streets. The first hour of the meeting, on the second hour, the committee will move into clause by clause of C14. Before we proceed, I would like to propose to committee members a way forward for today, considering there is votes in the House of Commons this morning. I would like to propose that during the half-hour bells, that should start in about 15 minutes, we spend 20 to 25 minutes continuing with the witnesses so we don't have to call them back. That would also provide you 5 to 10 minutes to get into the House to be able to be there for the question to be called to vote. As per the current rules, after the vote, you would have up to 10 minutes to come back to committee. So that would probably bring us till about 12:05 if everything goes on time, as I hope it does. And then we could proceed with clause by clause as we had anticipated. So that is the proposal I would like to put forward. Is there anyone concerned with that proposal?
Sorry, can you just clarify that one? I'm sorry, Madam Chair, we were just working out our speaking order. Can you just clarify your proposed approach again, just really briefly?
So we continue with our meeting this morning, and we spend about 20 to 25 minutes max of the 30-minute bells, continuing with witnesses. We can then leave, go vote, come back, and when we all return back, up to 10 minutes after the vote is complete, we proceed with clause by clause.
I think that's a reasonable approach, giving us time to go to the chamber to vote and time to return. Thank you.
So we have agreement? Yep. Excellent. Thank you so much. I would like to welcome the following witnesses for the first hour. We have Steve Kanalakos, City Manager. We've got Renee Amilcars, General Manager, Transit Services Department. From the National Capital Commission, we have Toby Nussbaum, Chief Executive Officer, accompanied with Hélène Migueles. And pour la Société de Transport de l'Outaouais.
And for the Société de Transport de l'Outaouais, we have Patrick Leclerc, and he's with Alain Tremblay. So we will ask all of our witnesses to keep their comments short, if possible, about 3 minutes or so. So we start with Mr. Kanalakos. Welcome, sir.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to share a perspective on city facilities around the parliamentary precinct. With me today is Ms. Renee Amilcar, the City of Ottawa's General Manager of Transit Services, who will deliver remarks specifically on the transit operations in this area. I'd like to begin my remarks with some background facts. As you know, Wellington Street is a highly recognizable and iconic street in the City of Ottawa. It's a very valuable asset. And is used by residents from both sides of the Ottawa River and by millions of tourists who visit the nation's capital every year. It's a major arterial road that connects Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway and the Portage Bridge with about 56,000 motorists, that's pre-COVID, traveling on an average day through that intersection to Rideau Street and Sussex Drive. It connects to one of 5 interprovincial bridges linking Gatineau and Ottawa, specifically the Portage Bridge, where 19,500 vehicles cross daily. Since February 2022, Wellington Street has been temporarily closed between Bank Street and Elgin Street, whereby approximately 19,500 daily motorists have had to find a new route to get across this section of the city. In terms of the future plans for Wellington Street, following the illegal occupation in February, City Council directed staff to initiate discussions with federal officials regarding the future function of that road, as well as the potential to transfer ownership. Those discussions are underway with representatives of Public Services and Procurement Canada, who have expressed in the past a federal interest in taking over the street and potentially other streets for a more cohesive management of federal assets in the precinct. It is expected that these investigative discussions will take some time to conclude, as there are many issues to consider, such as impact on traffic circulation through the downtown and how those impacts will be mitigated, access to the city's existing underground infrastructure for asset management, securing Wellington as one of the key corridors in the city's wider cycling network, for which considerable investments have been made by the city, and not least of all is the assessment of the real estate value of Wellington Street. At this time, the only road contemplated for full closure is Wellington Street, east of Bank and Elgin Street. Today, we will also hear from the City of Gatineau and STO on their tramway project that will cross into Ottawa. In 2020, City Council approved Wellington Street as one of 2 corridors for the STO to study in their next phase of tramway planning. The council preferred option is a tunnel under Spark Street, which has many transit and operational benefits and the potential for better integration with Ottawa's Confederation Line, which means more convenience for transit customers on both sides of the river. However, the Spark Street Tunnel has a higher capital cost than the Wellington Street surface option, even though this tramway will be serving generations to come. For Spark Street, the city has a public realm plan that council approved in 2019. This pedestrian mall is of significant interest to many organizations. It's owned by the city, but it's managed by the Spark Street Mall Authority, programmed in part by the Spark Street BIA, and surrounded by properties owned or leased by PSPC, the NCC, and others. The high-profile Spark Street Public Realm Plan was developed with many stakeholders and was intended to inform long-term planning exercises for the parliamentary precinct. Finally, in the area, the city is also reviewing the Rideau Sussex Colonel By node to improve mobility for all users and create a better public space for this significant downtown intersection. In closing, as you can appreciate, there are many complex issues and public space projects that have been established within and around the parliamentary precinct. Continued collaboration between the city and the federal officials will be critical for successful outcomes moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Renee Almakar. Welcome to PROC. You're on mute, and we want to hear your voice, please. Thank you.
Désolée.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me today to address the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. My name is René Amelkar, and I'm the General Manager of the City of Ottawa's Transit Services Department. We operate OC Transpo, Ottawa's public transit system, which includes diesel and electric buses, our light rail system, and paratranspo. Every day, OC Transpo keeps the city moving and provides important connections to and from Gatineau. As you look into expanding the parliamentary precinct to include sections of Wellington Street and Spark Street, I ask that the committee consider 3 key issues affecting transit users. These issues are important because we want to ensure that OC Transpo can maintain current service levels and that transit riders are not negatively affected. First, we want OC Transpo and the Société de Transport de l'Outaouais to be able to continue operating along Wellington Street and beyond Spark Street as we do today. This includes keeping bus stops and shelters at their current locations, at least until the future STO streetcar line is built. Transit service along Wellington Street is vital for many of our customers who live and work on both sides of the Ottawa River. And access to the street also allows us to efficiently pick up and drop off paratransport riders. Changing routes and bus stop locations or forcing paratransport riders to be dropped off farther from their destinations would disadvantage our customers. Secondly, we want to see the plans for the STO streetcar line, either along Wellington Street or under Spark Street or any other future location, go ahead and not be affected by the expansion of the parliamentary precinct. And finally, we would like OC Transpo and STO to continue to be allowed to detour buses along Wellington and Spark Streets in the event of any future external influences such as emergencies, and this without having to obtain approval from the National Capital Commission or any other agency to use federal lands. Unplanned detours are complex and resource intensive. Adding another layer of approvals can have a significant impact on service reliability for our riders and disadvantage residents who rely on public transit. As you can appreciate, it is important to implement detours in a timely and safe manner when necessary, of course, to ensure that our customers can easily get where they need to go. This concludes my remarks at today's Standing Committee meeting. Once again, thank you for inviting me to speak. We thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Toby Nussbaum, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm accompanied by Alain Migueles, who is the Vice President for City Capital Planning.
Corporation with a mandate to build a dynamic, sustainable, and inspiring capital that is a source of pride for all Canadians. And this mandate is relevant to the committee's work on the parliamentary precinct and the future of Wellington Street. And in particular, from a geographic perspective, what's important is the NCC's management of Confederation Boulevard, recognized by the wide sidewalks with red granite that offer visitors to the capital a guidepost to important sites in the core. That includes the loop from Parliament, west along Wellington Street, past the Judicial Precinct, over the Portage Bridge, east along Laurier Avenue in Gatineau, to the History Museum, back across Alexandra Bridge, passing along the National Gallery, and returning alongside Majors Hill Park. Further relevant context for the NCC in these discussions is the recent creation of an interprovincial transit project office within the NCC, as announced by the government in Budget 2021, to help advance the Société de Transport de l'Outaouais tramway project, which has already been mentioned. Reimagining the stretch of Wellington Street in front of Parliament, including as the alignment for a potential future capital transit loop between Gatineau and Ottawa, could occur in the context of a number of ambitious capital building projects currently underway, including, of course, the restoration of the parliamentary buildings themselves. À l'est, la pointe Nepean, qui offre une vue spectaculaire.
And to the east, Nepean Point, with its spectacular views of the Ottawa River, is being revitalized, and it will be linked by a new footbridge to Majors Hill Park. Better connections between the rocky escarpment to the west of Parliament and the river below will be part of an ambitious renewable energy plan, which is being led by our partner Public Services and Procurement Canada.
The beloved but failing Alexandra Bridge will be replaced, showing off the best of modern engineering architecture and offering viewpoints to take in the sites and really reinforcing the interprovincial character of the capital. It is clear the transfer of Wellington Street to the federal jurisdiction offers the opportunity to rethink the use of this important space for people visiting the capital, for gathering and peaceful protest, and for better public transit and active transportation links in the capital. Ce changement de compétence contribue.
This change of jurisdiction would also help mitigate the security risks to this critical infrastructure while ensuring a common vision for public connectivity and access to our democratic institutions.
NCC is committed to working with its federal partners to ensure safe public access to the roadway and surroundings, while also ensuring the respect of its ceremonial value to Canada's capital. We feel confident, Madam Chair, that together we can harness our ambition and investment and build a more beautiful, inviting, and resilient space in the heart of Canada's capital. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. And now we will move on to Patrick Leclerc. Bienvenue.
Welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee for the invitation. My name is Patrick Leclerc. I am the Director General of the Société de Transport de l'Outaouais. I'm with me, we have Alain Tremblay, who is the Project Office Manager. For over 10 years, the STO, in collaboration with several partners, including the PSPC and the National Capital Commission, the City of Ottawa, and Ville de Gatineau, has been studying and developing a dedicated public transit system that would link both sides of the river in our region. The challenges of connecting two provinces, two cities, including Canada's capital, and two public transit systems very likely make this transportation project one of the most complex in Canada. Without a doubt, these challenges add up, but they are greatly surpassed by the benefits expected, among other things in terms of mobility between the two cities, redesign of the urban space, and safety, especially around the parliamentary precinct. At this point, we're still looking at two options for the tram's insertion into downtown Ottawa. For today's purposes, I will focus on the at-grade insertion of the tram on Wellington Street. As you will see, this is quite an interesting solution from several points of view. To begin with, this is far more than a transportation project. It is a revitalization project. The tram's insertion on Wellington would involve significant urban redevelopment, and in this, active and collective modes of transportation will be able to safely coexist. The plan also includes a public space conducive to official events and ceremonies, urban design and landscaping that will create an inviting public environment, only steps from Canada's Parliament and nearby businesses and residential neighborhoods. 3 stations are planned to meet transit riders' needs and to align with the OC Transpo system. Expanding the pedestrian perimeter on Wellington Street will also improve the safety aspect for everyone, and here I'm referring to residents, merchants, workers, pedestrians, cyclists, public transit users, tourists, and of course, dignitaries, all dignitaries visiting the Parliament buildings. The next steps in the project will involve an in-depth analysis of the access points to the parliamentary precinct to ensure safe and fluid traffic. Given its frequency and high capacity, we are confident that the tram will encourage more people to use public transit, which in turn will significantly reduce the number of cars in the downtown. The STO will also adjust its current service offer and reduce the number of buses crossing to Ottawa. This significant reduction in the number of vehicles will enhance both the safety and fluidity of traffic in the heart of the nation's capital. There is, of course, no denying that the National Capital Region is expanding and that transportation needs are constantly growing. The Gatineau-Ottawa Tramway project will be able to meet those needs well beyond the next 30 to 50 years. From an environmental point of view, the tram will be able to accelerate the shift from single-occupancy vehicles to public transit. It will also be an invaluable asset in achieving ambitious GHG emission reduction targets, which are set by municipalities and other levels of governments. With that, Madam Chair, I conclude my testimony. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd be happy to answer the questions.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you. Welcome, everyone, again.
Begin in the House of Commons that the TV be turned on silent so that all members are aware of the situation in the House. We will get through one round of questions, and so I'm going to ask... I'm going to change the 6-minute rounds to 5-minute rounds, just so that we can be respectful of the time and all of our duties. We will start with Mr. Macaulay, followed by Mr. Nakvi, puis Madame Goudreau, et puis Madame Blaney. Mr. Macaulay?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you, please, to Mr. Kanelakos, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name. Are you aware if anyone in the Ottawa Police Service requested the government to invoke the Emergency Act?
Yeah, the pronunciation of my name, that's not the first time, it's Kanelakos. Thank you for that. I am not aware of anyone at Ottawa Police specifically requesting the invocation of the Emergency Act.
Okay, you're not aware of anyone. Thanks. February 3rd, one of the councillors, Councillor McKenney, wrote to the Commissioner of the RCMP, quoting an official request asking for the RCMP to assume policing responsibilities. Was that on behalf of the administration, on behalf of the mayor, officially on behalf of City Council, or was this on her own behalf?
Councillor McKenney was acting on her own behalf as an individual councillor representing one of the most impacted wards from the protest.
It wasn't an official request on behalf of the city or anyone else?
It was not.
No? Okay, thanks. Madam Chair, through you. Again, back to you, sir. How much does the City of Ottawa receive from the Government of Canada under the Payments in Lieu of Taxes program?
My apologies.
Yeah.
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'm sorry at this point.
Would you be able to ballpark?
No, I don't want to guess. I just can't remember the number because I've been immersed in a lot of numbers lately, and it's just not coming to me. Sorry.
Maybe you could provide it back to the committee. I assume it's a significant amount.
You know, it is a significant amounts in the tens of millions of dollars for sure.
In respect to that, with the changes, proposed changes being talked about with the parliamentary precinct, do you know how much is attributable to federal buildings in the Queen Street area lying between Rideau Canal and Kent Street?
No, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I don't have
Jane?
that specific information, but I can get it.
Okay. If the city transfers ownership responsibility of parts of downtown, would they be giving up that revenue from the government?
Not necessarily, because the buildings are still owned by the federal government. We receive payments in lieu of taxes. There has been a change recently because of provincial legislation, which is actually reducing the amount of money that the federal government will be providing. It's about, I know that number, it's about $13 million a year that we'll be receiving less from the federal government because of a tax class change that the provincial government has made, which inadvertently has affected us.
I'm just going to move on because we're just short. Just a couple last quick questions. Previous witness from the business improvement area on Bank had commented they're not keen and opposed the idea of further shutting down streets to traffic. Has the city done a study on the financial implications on those businesses or other businesses in the area if these changes were made?
Not yet, no.
Is it being planned? Is it going to happen soon, or?
I don't have any plans to do that at this point. That was a point raised by the executive director of the BIA. We have not looked at that.
Okay. We heard this week the Treasury Board has no plans, and the government has no plans set for public service workers to return to work in the buildings in the core. Has the city done financial implications study on what happens to the businesses, taxes, tax base, if these workers do not return to the buildings in the downtown core?
Not specifically, no.
Is it a concern to the city or to the businesses that you've spoken with?
It's our downtown, and the number of people downtown supporting businesses is a significant concern to the city.
How much time, Madam Chair? 45 seconds. Just quickly, I'm wondering if you've been wandering around downtown at all. Ottawa, much like Edmonton, unfortunately, and a lot of the major cities, is seeing a huge uptick in crime, violent crime, petty crime, homelessness, drug use. Is that a concern to the city that we're not getting the people back into work in the offices downtown? On behalf of the city.
Well, the city of Ottawa is very concerned about not having people coming back downtown to what it was pre-pandemic, because it has an impact on, as you say, a number of things, businesses.
Has the city reached out or written to the government at all, expressing these concerns officially?
I believe we have. Our mayor has written to the Prime Minister and to Treasury Board asking for a quicker return and a larger return of employees back to the public service.
Great, thank you, sir. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that exchange. I will confirm that bells have just started, and I will go to 5 minutes to you, Mr. Nakvi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I will start with Mr. Kanalakis. First, just very quickly, during the occupation, is my understanding correct that the city and the Ottawa Police was seeking support and resources from the federal government and was able to effectively use the Invocation of Emergencies Act to put an end to the occupation?
We were seeking resources, and we did use the act to put an end to the occupation.
The orders under the Emergencies Act provided the kind of powers that the Ottawa Police and the city needed to effectively manage the occupation and put an end to it. Am I correct?
You are correct. At that point of the occupation, those powers were very beneficial.
Great, thank you very much. In terms of the future of Wellington Street, Mr. Kanalakis, you mentioned in your remarks that conversations have started with the federal government. Can you provide a little bit more detail in terms of the nature of those conversations at this moment, and perhaps if NCC is involved in the conversations, and Mr. Nusbaum maybe can add something to that as well?
Yes, Madam Chair. The last conversation was about 2 months ago. Right now, I believe that PSPC and NCC are discussing who's going to be the lead on it, but I'll defer to Mr. Newsbaum on that one. And the discussion is capturing and starting to frame many of the things that I outlined in my opening comments.
Sure, happy to add, Madam Chair, that it is true we are engaged with PSPC on a discussion to make sure we've got a full scope of all of the issues that need to be raised, and the hope is that we can engage the City of Ottawa soon on some of the details which have been discussed so far.
Thank you. I will continue with Mr. Nusbaum, Madam Chair, and I want to thank him through you to also in cooperation with City of Ottawa recently putting planters on both Elgin and on Bank Street side of Wellington Street so that we can beautify the closure as opposed to have ugly barriers. So thank you very much for that particular action. Mr. Nusbaum, does the NCC support closure of Wellington Street and make it more part of an active transportation route, connecting it to some of the various routes that the NCC and the City of Ottawa are developing around the downtown core?
Yeah, I think we have a very open mind. We see a lot of advantages to focusing that portion of Wellington Street on, of course, service vehicles for Parliament Hill, public transportation, active transportation. At the same time, we do recognize that there is some data that still needs to be collected and better understood, traffic studies and so on. So I think it's fair to say we have a very open mind and are positively inclined towards a rethink of how that space can work.
Thank you. And perhaps I can now ask, through you, Madam Chair, question to Ms. Amilcar on transit routes, both in terms of OC Transpo and STO. How is, since Wellington Street is closed right now, how are the detours working out in terms of stops, use by customers, etc.?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have line 15, which used to go on Wellington Street and the close-off section. So we have a detour in place, and we have issued relevant information to our clients. So that's the status, the situation of the line 15. There's also line 17, which would normally take Wellington Street, but since the start of the pandemic, we have suspended this line, but it will eventually open at some point.
Have you seen an increase in use of the light rail train system as a result of some of these routes detoured or suspended?
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, we have not seen an increase given the fact that federal employees are not yet back in the city. So we are certainly dealing with very low usage numbers, and that also has an impact on the frequency of our buses on Wellington Street.
Okay, and just very quickly, and this information may not be available, Mr. Kanalakis, but if you can provide that. You talked about the number of transit, or number of motor vehicle, the volume of motor vehicle on Wellington Street. I wonder if data could be shared in terms of rates of accidents, injuries, or fatalities, if any, also on Wellington Street due to the vehicular traffic for the benefit of this committee.
Yeah, we'd be happy to provide that to the committee. We have that data. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Madame Goudreau?
Madame Goudreau, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I will do a recap of where we are. the objective of the purpose of this committee is to underline the potential advantages of opening up a larger perimeter when it comes to the security of the Parliament. And of course, questions from my colleagues up to this point have been really interesting. So I will go into a different type of questions, if you will. It's good because we have less time than envisaged. So my questions, I will start with Madam Chair, through you, Mr. Nussbaum. So what I would like to know from you is what would be the order of things that need to be applied, because the rail project is very interesting indeed, but what are the stages that need to happen, that need to be part of the report when it comes to the security of this whole project? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. I will ask my colleague Alain Migueles to respond to the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we are working with STO on the one hand to be ready as a federal family to initially start with the initial studies. It will encompass Ottawa, Ontario, and Portage Bridge, and parts of Gatineau on the other hand. So this first stage of studies will lead us to a construction project, which will be the actual physical start of the project, the realization phase of the project. And the tram-GO, Gatineau-Ottawa Tramway or streetcar line, will thus be started, the construction work on it, and then that will take us to the intersection between Elgin and Wellington Streets. Initially, the National Capital Commission also has the mandate of studying a following phase, which is not subject to a demand for financing right now, but that would complete the circle, if you will. So that will make sure that the streetcar will continue on the Alexandra Bridge and cross back onto the Quebec side, so that we have a loop in the downtown area. Thank you. Well, I also have a follow-up question. We heard from Algonquin representatives from the community who appeared before us, and we felt a sense of inclusion, if you will, and accessibility in connection with this community. And we were even told or given information about the rights, the manifestation or protest rights, if you will. So what's the latest in terms of the progress you've made in terms of reaching out to the Algonquin community representatives? Madam Chair, we are fully aware of the necessity to include the Algonquin community. At the moment, we have discussions when it comes to the replacing the Alexandra Bridge. The streetcar goes through the Portage Bridge and into territories which are very important for the Algonquin community, so we are in close collaboration with the Algonquin Nation. Thank you. Now, my question to the City of Ottawa, who are with us. Well, we've heard many witnesses, Madam Chair, through you, when we talk about the rail line loop. We've heard voices saying that this would be an original idea, and that to me is very interesting. But right now we're focusing on the security aspect of things, and a passenger walkway is one thing, but a streetcar will bring a lot of people, a lot of traffic here. So how do you deal with the security component of it? How can you ensure us that you can manage everything, all the while keeping security of parliamentarians in mind, top of mind?
A very relevant question. Unfortunately, though, those technical difficulties that the member presented have not yet been analyzed. That's part of the work that's going to be happening in the future with the studies that we'll be undertaking.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Chair, my question again to the City of Have you been informed that the convoy was arriving, that they were on their way?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. It broke up at the very end. My apologies.
Lucky you, it's actually a question for Monsieur Leclerc. So we'll just pass it.
En fait, pour ce qui est de peut-être sur le volet de la sécurité,
When it comes to the security aspect of things, having a streetcar line and a tramway and closing off Wellington Street between Bank and Elgin Street, when you take vehicles out of the question, especially private cars, and we've seen this in other cities, you actually improve security because a tramway is a fixed installation and it's very visible. It's easier to manage compared to all the cars, private cars that will be passing. So when it comes to security before up to Bank Street, so to the west of Bank Street, we've looked into studies where there was a question of a tunnel to undergo different intersections. So this might be a mitigating factor, but as mentioned previously, Madam Chair, we would need further analysis. Once we have financing, those will be carried out, and we will have more information on that. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was very short. Yes, thank you. Madam Blaney, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, and of course, as always, through you, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. I have a few questions, and then I know we have to head out to vote. But I guess my first question will be both to the City of Ottawa and to the STO. We know, I'm from British Columbia, that in Vancouver we saw a lot of business increase downtown when they made it more cycle and transit friendly. We know a lot of businesses in their area were very concerned that their businesses would suffer, but actually found the reverse. So I'm just wondering, has the city or STO done any work or research on the impact of businesses and tourism if the streets are closed to car traffic, and how to move forward with changing, which is so important, especially with GHGs, that whole energy around being so car-centric and transitioning to a more friendly way of traveling. So I'm just wondering if there's any work that's been done on that. I'll go to the city first.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I was just going to ask if this was directed to the city first. Active transportation is something that the city is actively is very supportive of, and our council is pushing very much for this and is in our strategic plans. But we need a balanced network. It just can't be in the way this city operates, in our view, push to one versus the other. It needs to be balanced, and that's the challenge with this particular corridor.
Do you have anything to add, STO?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In fact, when it comes to return on investment, what we know is that investment in public transport usually bring back $3 for every dollar that is invested, and this is something you don't get by building more roads. But on a more local level, for instance, if you look at Sparks, Wellington, and Gatineau downtown, these would be chapters of the project, again, that will be better defined as we do further studies when we look into the further local economic benefits of it.
Important, and it was mentioned by STO earlier, is that idea of security. I mean, what we saw profoundly during the convoy was there was a huge concern of threat to our parliament, to the very foundation of our democracy in Canada. So I understand that it sounds like there's exploration of either going along Wellington or under Spark Street. So I guess what I'm curious about, and I'll ask the city first and come back to STO as well, is just what is the analysis process of how to keep people safe, knowing that where we're bringing people is to the capital, where the foundation of our democracy is, and how are we going to assure that that process is as safe as possible and that we don't create risk both for this place but also for the people who would be using that transit. And then the last question I have, and this will go to the city and then I'll stop talking, is just around, we know that parts of Wellington are blocked off right now. I see in this testimony that there's a request to be able to use that space. Is there any large complaints about that space being blocked off right now that is bringing forward concerns for the city or for the people who use transit? So those are my two questions.
On the first question, as I said in my remarks, Madam Chair, the City Council does prefer the tunnel option under Spark Street, but it is a very expensive option. So they did direct that we pursue the second choice, which is a tramway on the surface. And so those studies have to be done. On the second question, the closure of Wellington Street certainly has brought some complaints. It has disrupted the historic traffic flow. Mind you, it's not as heavy as it was pre-pandemic, but it has disrupted the historic traffic flow. But people are adjusting. But you're seeing some of those impacts in other side streets, off streets, in various modes of transportation because of it.
And can I just add one part? Because one of the questions I was asking was specifically around security. So as you're studying both the tunnel and the tramway, is that an essential part of that study, is the security for people and for the capital?
Well, security has always been an issue for Wellington Street, but right now it's an exponential concern after what happened last February, and it will be considered as part of that, in my view.
Il y a vraiment.
So there's special focus on the security component of all this. Even before the protest in Ottawa, we were working with specialized security services on the insertion to Wellington Street. When it comes to where we put the stops, there's of course a security component to it. You have the Loungeman building, and then we, at that point, of course, there's scanning of vehicles that takes place to have access to the parliamentary precinct, of course. So we are working with points of the project like that with the security services. So we will have experts on board to deal with these aspects of it. And we also have to have a look at the tunnel insertion aspect of it. And again, before there were concerns in the past when it comes to explosives, for instance, on vehicles on rails, but over the recent years we've seen trucks or other vehicles being used as ramming devices. So that's another thing to be aware of when it comes to the parliamentary precincts.
Thank you so much for that exchange. I would like to, on behalf of PROC committee members, thank all the witnesses for taking the time to be here with us today. Should something come to mind and you would like to share it with members, I would encourage you to share it with the clerk so that it can be circulated. I like to believe that PROC committee is the most watched committee out of all of them, so I'm sure this is very invigorating. And so if something comes up, please do send it to us so that we can consider it. With that, I hope all of you have a good day and that you keep well and safe. For committee members, I would just like to, notify, I guess you all know that this is the last group of witnesses that we had appearing for this study. We are coming close to the summer adjournment, so I'm guessing that we've not had time to talk about recommendations, but perhaps a summary of testimony for us to have available for ourselves, and then we can see where the committee would go from there. It's something I'll propose. We don't need to decide on that there, but ponder it perhaps amongst your teams. Is that a briefing note we want analysts to compile so that we can then come together to look at if we are making a recommendation or not, so that that work can continue? The second thing before we go to vote is the clerk had circulated a study budget for C14, and if there's no issues with it, we would like to see that approved. It was just primarily for headsets and so forth. Excellent. We'll see you after the vote, and we will proceed with clause by clause for C14. Thank you all. Second part of our meeting, we are conducting clause by clause of Bill C-14. Should members have any technical questions about the clauses of the bill, officials from the Privy Council Office and Elections Canada are present to provide answers as we move through the bill. We have Robert Sampson, General Counsel and Senior Director, Legal Services from Elections Canada, accompanied by Pierre Desjardins, Senior Director, Election Redistribution. And then from the Privy Council Office, we have Rachel Pereira, Director, Democratic Institutions, as well as Nicholas McDonald, Legal Counsel, Legal Services Sector. And I'm also excited to share that we have a legislative clerk with us, Mr. Jacques Maziad, to guide us through the process. With that, we pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, a consideration of Clause 1, the alternative title, is postponed. The Chair calls Clause 2. Donc, je demande à Monsieur Terrien.
So I ask Mr. Terrien if he wants to propose his amendment, and I would like to just make it clear for all of our MPs that there's a good chance that I already have made a decision. Yes, but you are ignoring my persuasive powers, Madam Chair. Well, you are about to change your ideas. Without surprise, of course, you saw me coming in, but I'd like to move an amendment to the Bill 14, C-14. I will read the amendment. I think everyone has that. I'll read it in French, but you have it in English. That Bill C-14 in Clause 2 be amended by adding after line 16 on page 1 the following. 2, subsection 51(1) of the Act is amended by adding the following after Rule 4, 4.1, after the application of Rules 1 and 2 and Section 51A, there shall be, in respect of Quebec, there shall, in respect of Quebec, be added any additional members needed so that after the completion of the readjustment, the total number of members for that province is not less than 25% of the total number of members in the House of Commons. So you already heard me talk about this. I'll just give you a brief summary of what that means, and it touches a number of subjects. This amendment, first and foremost, is fundamental and necessary to protect Quebec's political weight. Quebec is a nation. Some will tell you it's a distinct society, but everyone agrees that there's a particularity to Quebec that needs to be protected for Quebecers, and we are constantly threatened by the geography, and threatened in an aggressive sense, not ill-treated, treated. This is a difficult situation for the longevity and sustainability of our nation. That is why we are asking for a guarantee of 25%. That should be a level that stays until the independence of Quebec, probably. So it is necessary because Quebec needs to be well represented in Ottawa. There are sometimes commentary pointing to other things, but the House of Commons gave the title of nation to Quebec. There was a motion to recognize Quebec with a nation with the common language of French, and I should maybe have the numbers, but it was a very strong majority that voted in favor. So listen, there has to be sense, meaning to our words. We keep talking, but we also take action, and we come up with bills that are the result of our discussions, and we take them to the chamber. But there should be traces of this, traceability of this. We have to live up to our discussions. So we had a motion that asked for 2 changes for the electoral maps. So Quebec should not lose MPs, because you know that since 1970, there hasn't been a province that lost MPs, and that was announced also. I was going to say Bank of Canada, but Elections Canada shared that information in a study, and so there was a regression in the numbers. This is unacceptable. We mentioned this in our motion, but we also added that starting from now on, we cannot let Quebec lose from its political weight in the House of Commons, because I can come up with the numbers. They are out there available. Historically speaking, Quebec went from 33% to 23%, and we could keep going down. Even with Bill C-14, this will lead to a reduction of the political weight of Quebec, even though we keep the number of MPs. So we met with experts who told us that we don't have to have 7 provinces and 50% of the population to apply this change, and the minister defended against that idea. I don't have the exact quote, and I don't want to attribute wrong words to him, but of course I do have all the respect to the intelligence of our members of the committee. You'll let me know if I start saying something that doesn't make sense, but it was as if it applies to certain provinces, that this couldn't be done, and that the change need to be done with 7 provinces at 50%, but I don't accept that. But Patrick Taillon came before us, said, no, we don't need this. We are able to do these changes without constitutional change with 7 provinces and 50% of the population. He is the only expert that came before us to explain the situation and answer our questions. So what I say is that that carries significant weight, and the minister came up with 2 other names, but I would have liked to see and meet these people and talk to them because, you know, writing things is one thing, but coming to committee and defending these on the screen or in person physically is something else. So I'm not saying it was ill-organized at all, but I'm just underlining the facts. So he went a step further, saying, as I resumed, that the situation of Quebec is going through a political atrophy in the House of Commons, and it's becoming very concerning for the rest of things, for what's to follow. So this is something we should not ignore. So I am wrapping up, Madam President, but we need to do things properly because this is indeed a very important topic for Quebecers. I will read the words, if you will, to add a clause. Since 1987, courts have recognized that the federal parliament has the powers to adopt measures in this sense. So I can give you details of this as well. In 1987, there was a court case in BC, and a fundamental principle was recognized, effective representation. And if you very quickly do the analysis of this, the weight of the electoral or votes of certain electors should not be off balance compared to other groups. So as a general rule, it's tolerated, it's accepted, but there are points in time where when you look at the individual level, the political weight might shift slightly, but not astronomically. We're not going to double or triple the number of MPs for a province, right? Because in that case, those words would have been very important. But in this case before us, we're not going from 23 to 30 or 30 to 40. We're looking at minor changes. So Mr. Taillon was mentioning this fact as well. These are minor changes that should be possible. We have senatorial clauses, acquired rights, territorial clauses. This has already been done. And there's also, of course, the respect to natural communities, geographical characteristics, and the interests of different collectivities, different groups, communities need to be taken into account. So all this to say that what I'm proposing as an amendment is something that's done. And it is in interest of this bill, because this bill's mission is to focus and work on Quebec's political weight. So why do we start and finish with a small step, whereas we can do this rigorously and make sure that in this bill we recognize that Quebec needs to be protected due to its exceptional nature. And when I say exceptional, it's not to say that we're better than others. No, Quebec nationalism is not that. No, you would never hear me say this. We are not better. We are not worse. I love you all, but we're just different. We have a language, culture that are different and the rest of it. So we have to respect these differences. And Madam Chair, I will finish with the following. The minister said something that there are experts saying it's possible, others saying it's not possible, but I'd like to remind you that Martin Champoux, MP from Drummond, tabled a bill that was voted on yesterday, and the PROC subcommittee did its job, and it was to verify whether the bill was within the boundaries of the mandate as drawn by the House of Commons. And this was work done by the subcommittee, PROC subcommittee. But weirdly, the subcommittee said that Bill 46, which was exactly the same as my amendment, was a possible change without going through all the other hoops. So I have a lot of respect for PROC's work. I pronounce PROC with the English accent. Just say that I want to be your friend. So if you say that this is not possible, then PROC doesn't work rigorously, but I have profound respect for both Madam Chair, but for all the members, of course, which I know all of you. I've been here since 2019. Before that, then I had another colleague in my place. But all this to say, to invite you to consider the fact that Quebec nation is precious and fragile. There is a Claude Gauthier song, which again is an homage to the Quebec particularity, and I invite all of you to listen to that. It's called Mon plus beau voyage. It refers to people in danger. This is what we're experiencing in Quebec, and honestly, this is not something I wish, because every day you wake up, it's a fight to protect your language, your culture, to make sure that the only francophone state in North America can continue to survive, and so that my children, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren never tell me, never say, do you remember when we were French to me? So that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tarian. Thank you for the comments, and I think you were able to see that everyone was listening attentively, so we very much appreciate your comments. But, as I said, I already have a decision, and nothing you said could have possibly changed my decision. So C14 modifies Article 51 of the Constitutional Act of 1867 to establish that number of MPs attributable to a province cannot be inferior to the number of MPs that were attributed to that province during the 43rd Parliament. So the total number of parliamentarians, MPs for the province of Quebec cannot be less than 25% of the number of MPs in the House of Commons. When you look at the third edition of the document, page 770, an amendment on a bill sent to the committee during second reading is inadmissible if it goes beyond the scope and the principles. So the chair is of the opinion that when it comes to C14, the attribution to the province of Quebec, 25% of the chairs in the House of Commons could require a reduction in the number of seats for one or more provinces, which is against the principle of the bill. That is why I declare this amendment inadmissible. Okay, clearly, Madam Chair, I do understand your position. I do not share that position. With all due respect, of course, I have a lot of respect for the work you do and for the person you are. But I will still ask for a vote to go against the chair's decision. Of course.
Shall the chair's ruling be sustained? Pour appuyer la présidente, vous votez oui. Pour
To support the chair, you say you vote yes, and to go against the chair's decision, you vote no.
Romanado.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Mr. Louis.
I vote yes.
Madame Diab.
Je vote oui.
Miss O'Connell.
Yes.
Mr. Macaulay.
Yes.
Mr. Viss.
Yes.
Mr. Scheer.
Yes.
Mr. Kimmich.
Yes.
Monsieur Terrien.
No.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Ruling sustained, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I ask members, shall...
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to move another amendment that will be circulated electronically right at this very moment. I'll just start, and I think our staff will pass it out, so I'll just hold my comments until everyone has a chance to receive it. You're going to have to check the inadmissibility. Should I start talking about why I'm doing it right away? Okay. Does everyone have it?
Do you have a copy? I'm passing it out.
Yeah.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes?
Sorry, do we have it electronically for those of us online?
It's being shared around, but just in the...
I think it's been sent electronically to the chair.
It's been sent to the chair? Or the
Sorry,
clerk?
to the clerk.
Excellent. And he will hit forward because he's just passing it around to the people in the room. I am asking Mr. Viss to commence his comments just to, in the interest of time.
Thanks.
We've had some great discussions here over the last number of weeks about
Go ahead. I'm new.
Yeah, we've had some great discussions over the last few weeks and in Parliament about how we deal with these difficult situations. And, you know, Mr. Terrien got me thinking a lot about Quebec's place in the history of Canada and also my own province of British Columbia. People don't remember, if they don't know in this room, BC joined Confederation largely as an administrative matter. We were developed, if you look on the BC legislature website, why did BC come into an existence? BC came into an existence because of the railway to serve for trade for Ontario and Quebec, the two, or Upper and Lower Canada. We were an economic concern. BC is home to more Indigenous languages and Indigenous people than probably any other part of the country. We have a rich history that has been formed subsequently with the railway, both rich negatively and positively. And as Mr. Terrien mentioned in his comments, I raised the point in the last meeting that a taxpayer in British Columbia, the amount that they give to our federal government, they should receive requisite representation in the House of Commons. So I felt in good faith as a Westerner and as a British Columbian that I've learned something from the Bloc Québécois, that I need to stand up a little stronger for my province to ensure that we have adequate and effective representation in this House too. So what this amendment to C14 essentially does is, after the change to the threshold, apply rep by pop to the, as it says there, after the application of rules 1 to 4 in section 51A, in respect of each province, there shall be added, if necessary, a number of members such that the number of members assigned to the province is proportionate to the number of members that would have been assigned in accordance with rule number 1. There has been many accommodations for Atlantic Canada with the Senate clause to ensure that Atlantic Canadians are overrepresented. Quebec is fighting for parity. I understand that. But as a British Columbian, I want parity too. And it doesn't sit well with me that my province is structurally underrepresented in this federation, along with Alberta and Ontario. So I'm putting this amendment forward in good faith. And I will leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank you for coming to us with this amendment in good faith. I'm going to actually suspend committee for a couple moments for me to debate this out with the ledge clerk to figure out kind of if it's within scope or not. It's adding number of seats across the board, which would allow me to understand that there might be a need for I just need to figure out where we're at. Mr. Terrien.
I would have liked that our colleague explained to us in more detail the scope of this amendment, because I read it, I understand it, but I want everyone to understand what it means, because it is subtle. Maybe we can have a numbered example, because, you know, you come out with this, but what's the concrete ramification of this? I would like him to explain. He wants this, but what is it exactly? I would like him to tell us what exactly in specific concrete terms this represents or means. So before going through with this, I would like him to explain to us what it means.
You know what? Tom Mick's also a very passionate member about this issue, and I'm going to allow him to explain in more detail.
Madam Chair, do you want me to jump in at this point and continue this debate, or would you like to make a ruling first in a consultation with the clerk?
I think since this is a good faith conversation, if you don't mind just perhaps providing Mr. Terrien that answer, it might be good for members, and I will continue the work on the side if you want to, once again.
Madam Chair, I'd be happy to, through you, to Monsieur Terrien, donc, de la façon que je...
So the way I understand the amendment that's been proposed by MP from BC, from the Conservative Party, is that after Rule 4 in the Constitution and the section, we would go back to Rule number 1 to make sure that every province has the same percentage in terms of population. So the way I understand it is that, let's say, British Columbia, the province, represents 11% of the Canadian population. So after every other rule is applied, that, well, the rule will apply, and BC would have 11% of the seats in the House of Commons. So the three provinces that would be impacted would be my province of Alberta, the British Columbia, and Ontario. These provinces would have a higher number of seats in the House of Commons as per the percentage of the Canadian population that they have in their provinces. That would be the impact of the amendment that's been proposed. So all the applicable clauses would be they wouldn't be null and void, but if Madam Chair, my amendment is not admissible, and if this one is admissible, it shouldn't be admissible either. Well, I always appreciate all comments and the discussion.
Based on listening to what's been proposed, based on reading this, based on speaking with the legislative clerk, I would actually rule that this is not admissible. And so I would just like to, I'm not sure if it's Mr. Uvis, do you want to reply to that, or are we okay with accepting my ruling?
We can't do something indirectly if you cannot do it directly.
You know, we want to find better consensus with how we distribute power within the House of Commons. And I really do strongly believe that moving forward in 10 years' time, we're going to have to look at what we just did to what we've been doing with this bill. But I strongly believe that to find equality within our federation, provinces shouldn't be structurally underrepresented at the expense of others, both in the Senate and in the House of Commons. And coming from a part of the country where we only have 6 Senate seats, and we are underrepresented in the House of Commons, I have a duty as a legislator to raise that point time and time again, because where is economic growth going in Canada? It's going to British Columbia because of it's going to British Columbia because of the economic growth in Asia. Our ports are strategic for the entire country, but British Columbia doesn't have the ability to stand and fight for itself, and we have all these senators making decisions for our province who have no connection to the beauty and splendor of my riding where the 2 railways meet, for example. So I'll leave it at that, Madam
accept my
Chair.
ruling?
And thank you, and I know I do accept the ruling. And please note that your province is underrepresented too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
On a peut-être devant nous le futur premier.
Well, we might have the first MP of the future Maverick Party before us.
Bring us right back for a second and just say thank you for that exchange and thank you for that passion. My initials are BC, so I've got a lot of respect and love for your beautiful province. And I can see that this conversation will continue. For the sake of time and respect for your time and attention, I will ask members, shall Clause 2 carry?
Aye.
Yes. Shall Clause... Mr. Terrien?
Can we ask for a vote? Yes, you can ask for the vote.
Mr. Terrien would like a vote, so I go to the clerk.
The question is on clause 2. La question est sur l'article 2. Madame Romanado.
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Mr. Louis.
Yes.
Madame Diab.
Oui.
Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Viss.
Yes.
Mr. Scheer.
Yes.
Mr. Kimmich.
Oui.
Mr. Terrien.
No.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Clause 2 carried.
Thank you. Shall
Point of
Clause...
order, point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Scheer?
I just wonder if there might be agreement for the rest of the clauses to instead of record division, just test the will of the committee if we might adopt them on division. If somebody isn't enthusiastically supportive, maybe we could just do on division.
Thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Scheer. Are we okay with proceeding by accepting the rest of the clauses on division?
Or at least one by one, if you want to go through them one by one, but rather than recorded divisions, just on division if somebody objects.
Mr. Scheer, I think your experience has been well received by the members in the room, so I thank you for your constructive answers and solutions always. Thank you. All right, so that would let us actually get to I do need to ask, shall the alternative title carry? On division? Perfect. And shall the title carry? On division. On division. Shall the bill carry?
On division.
On division. And shall the chair report the bill to the House?
On division.
On division. That is absolutely excellent. And so I would say, good job, very productive committee members. And with that, we will be returning to Tuesday for committee. We will be in camera and we will proceed with the outstanding reports that we will be working on. And I look forward to seeing you next week. I hope everyone keeps well and safe. And I thank you for your time and attention. Meeting adjourned.